This video is a continuation of another video on the Samba server. In that video, we briefly described the default version of the Samba configuration file, etc/samba/smb.conf, through the default home share. Continuing on in the Samba configuration file, what comes next is the default printer share. And the default printer stanza includes an error. There is no user/spool/samba directory. You should change that to var/spool/samba. Otherwise, printers you configure through this server won't print, and that's not good. Note how browsable is set to no. But remember, we saw shared printers with the SMB client-L localhost command in the previous video. That was made possible due to the printcap name directive, which shares printers listed in the etc/printcap configuration file. As it's a global directive, it overrides settings in the printer share. Now look at the sum of the stanzas which follow. Note the comment characters. There are two different comment characters. This one here, the hash mark, sometimes also known as the pound sign or the number sign, and the semicolon. If the semicolon is removed from the stanza, this activates the temp directory, as defined by this path, as a global share accessible to and writable by all users. Let's say I wanted to configure this stanza with these kinds of permissions on another directory. I get a hint here because the temp directory has full read, write, and execute permissions, and the sticky bit all set on that directory. Which corresponds to writability by all users. So, to configure the same sort of permissions on a new directory, say the test directory, I'd have to set the sticky bit and full read, write, and execute permissions for all users. And note the result here. We have the same permissions as well as the same sticky bit set for both the temp and test directories. You also need to know how to limit access to shared directories in Samba. The stanza which follows assumes that write access is limited to members of the staff group. The @ sign means that Samba looks for staff in the local etc/group configuration file. So while this means the home/Samba directory is readable by all, it's only writable by those users who are listed as members of the staff directory in etc/group and also happen to have passwords in the Samba password database, which we've discussed in the previous video. Let's jump down a bit to a share associated with user Fred. Specifically, as commented, access to Fred service is limited to the username Fred. And at the end of the file, there is a similar share stanza available. It's a slightly different directory, but access is limited to users Mary and Fred. You can also limit access by IP address, host name, or domain name. For example, the following directive, this host allow directive, limits access first to the local host system, which corresponds to the 127.IP version 4 address. You can substitute localhost for that address. The 10. Address, which corresponds to the 10.0.0.0 network address. And all systems on the example.net domain. For example, ns.example.net would have access to this particular share. When I share with Samba, I start with the template available from the default Samba configuration file, and now you should be able to do so as well. Yes, there's more security for Samba related to firewalls and security enhanced Linux, and we'll discuss that in another video.